Today we're going to talk about all the Marys. Well, sort of. And then some other people too. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to do this series on Mary Magdalene, what we can know about her and what we can't know about her, and how she became known in certain ways, how she was remembered, and what new light we might shine on her now here in 2026. And we're doing this because there are some new things that change a lot about what we understand about Mary, or might, just a few years ago. And it's due to computer imaging that got stronger and better so that more people around the world could notice things in ancient writings that are now accessible to people everywhere that were ignored or glossed over before. So today we're going to look at the enduring story that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. How many of you have heard this before or think that in your head? So, Mary Magdalene is mentioned only one time in the New Testament before Jesus dies. And you just heard Shelley read it a second ago. She shows up in a lot of stories of the crucifixion and the resurrection, but only once before in Jesus' lifetime, and that's from our text today, which, just to repeat, soon afterwards he went on through one town and village to another, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, as well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. There you go. That's what we know. And Joanna, and the wife of Herod's steward Chuza, and Susanna, and many others, who ministered to them out of their own resources. So I guess we know that piece too. So it's interesting, there are so few people in the Bible who get more than one word in their name. Simon Peter, Judas Iscariot, Jesus of Nazareth, I think that's about it. Mary was a name for, this is from other sources outside of the Bible, about 20% of all females around at the time. So that's a lot of Marys. They were all really named after Miriam, who was Moses' wife. That's the derivative of the name. Besides women named Mary, most other women go unnamed except Joanna, Susanna, Salome, you hear later on. Most others go unnamed. They are instead called a certain woman, or a woman of the city, or who was a sinner, or something else. With Mary Magdalene, we get this other marker, this Magdalene, and most would say that this mark is the name of the town that she's from, Magdala, and that might be true. We'll look into that in the next couple weeks. Because she is so frequently named, she must be kind of a big deal. Not during Jesus' life, but after. We're going to look at those in a little bit. Here are the places where you'll see her name after the resurrection. She appears 12 other times. Let me go back to the picture for a second, and I'm going to talk about that later. Never mind. Remind me. In Matthew 27, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting opposite the tomb. In Mark, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. In Luke, it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and others who were with them who told this to the apostles. In Matthew 28, Jesus has risen. After the Sabbath at dawn, the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look in the tomb. Matthew 27, among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee. In John 19, near the cross, Jesus stood with his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Mark 16, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Mark 15, some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and the younger of the James the younger, and of Joseph and Salome. John 20, Mary Magdalene went to his disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord. John 20, verse 1. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. John 20, 11, Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look in the tomb. Mark 16, which is this part of Mark that was added later, not in the earliest manuscripts. When Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. Luke 8 is the verse that we just read. Does anyone see anything in any of these texts that says Mary Magdalene, who was a prostitute? Is it though? So where does this idea come from? Part of it comes from the problem of all the Marys, and I'm borrowing heavily from this book this week. I think you'll like the name, Peter, Paul, and Mary Magdalene. The Followers of Jesus in History and Legend by Bart Ehrman. You can look at it later if you want. Next season, we're going to look at Peter. So during Lent, we'll get to do a deep dive into the life of Peter. Probably won't be this long because, well, who knows what's going to be happening in the world that we have to figure out how to associate with this. But preachers, particularly in the past, wanted to combine the Marys to try to figure out how to paint a picture of this woman who they really wanted to talk about. And sometimes they decided to do that by combining Marys and sometimes combining unnamed women in the Bible and assigning that to Mary Magdalene too. This Mary Magdalene had a lot of power in the minds of these men, and actually probably did. Note that she is almost always named first in those lists, like Peter is. Probably a leader, at least among the women who were following Jesus. And if you're a man in a church that has decided women should not be leaders, for whatever reason, you had to do some work to keep this woman down. So more than one preacher in the past decides that Mary Magdalene is a story you haven't heard from all the ones that I have read, the story about the sinful woman who's from the city who comes to anoint Jesus' feet. She brings this jar of nard. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, there. So almost always when you look for pictures of Mary Magdalene, you'll see her with this really long curly hair that wouldn't have been showing, right? And almost always with like her shoulders bared or like cleavage or both, and almost always with this jar of sorts, which you could say is about taking it to the tomb, because she does take spices to the tomb after Jesus is dead, but more likely is related to this conflating of the unnamed woman who anoints Jesus' feet and then dries them with her hair and her tears. Do you remember this story? We'll get there in a month or two as well. That woman is unnamed. I think this is why, yep, I said that. So, yep, it could be a jar that is shaped like a skull. She's called a sinful woman this woman that isn't Mary Magdalene, but is the one who anointed Jesus' feet, is called a sinful woman. But there are a great many sins in the world. And so to just automatically assume that it's some kind of sexual sin is just another weird thing that we do with this, like, why elevating sexual sins among all of the others that are listed in the Bible. And also just misogyny. So, also, it could just have something to do with the whatever is on the minds of the people who are preaching. People have also decided that she must be the woman who was almost stoned to death for committing adultery. That woman is also unnamed. And they've shown that they're willing to name Mary Magdalene when she's there. So there's no reason to believe that she would be unnamed in one of those places. From all the stories about Marys and unnamed women, the kind of conglomerate Mary has come to be known in the collective mind, creating Mary Magdalene, the reformed prostitute and exorcised demoniac who anointed Jesus for burial prior to his death with the perfume in her tears, which she wipes off with her hair, which is just a large combination of a lot of different women. Here's the oldest example that they can find of where this happened. It comes from a sermon in 591 by Pope Gregory the Great. The Pope first decides that the woman who was a sinner who came in to wash Jesus' feet with her tears and a jar of nard is Mary Magdalene. And then he brings up her 7 demons from the actual text that talks about Mary Magdalene that were cast out of her, the part that we do know, and makes some assumptions about what those demons are. That the 7 demons were actually, and then he combines them with the 7 deadly sins. And the 7 deadly sins are not in the Bible. They are Catholic teaching that were started a while before Gregory and then finalized by Gregory. So, here's how he extrapolates her 7 demons into the 7 deadly sins. She brought an alabaster vase full of perfume, and standing behind Jesus at her feet, she began to water them with her tears and to wipe them with the hair of her head, and they kissed them. I like that because that shows that Mary, in Gregory's mind, uses they, them pronouns. And sprinkled them with perfume. It is very evident, my brethren, that this woman, formerly addicted to forbidden deeds, had used perfume to give her flesh a pleasant odor, and what she had shamefully granted to herself, she now offered to God in a manner worthy of praise. She had desired the things of earth by her eyes, but now mortifying them with her penance, she was crying. She had emphasized the beauty of her hair to adorn her face, but she was now using it to wipe away her tears. Her mouth had uttered words of pride, but now kissing the feet of the Lord, she was staring at the mouth in the footsteps of her Redeemer. Thus, all that she had in it of attractions to charm, she found there material to sacrifice. She turned her crimes into many virtues, that all that in her that had despised God in sin was put to the service of God in penance. And there you go. That's how we get Mary Magdalene, who becomes the woman who is assumed to be a prostitute. It seems Mary's body is seen as a threat, something that can be used to seduce men and lead them away. The preferred version of her is when she is sorrowful and penitent, crying and washing Jesus' feet by the people who wrote this stuff down and were considered authoritative. From then until now, even in images like in The Last Temptation of Christ and Jesus Christ Superstar, right? I could launch into that whole song, and I think John could too, but we'll refrain from that for today. Now, I'm not going to say that he was the first one to name her for something that she was not, or if one considers prostitution to be an insult, he's not the first to insult her, and we will go into that in future weeks. People had problems with Mary Magdalene. I also would not be offended if a sex worker was one of Jesus' followers. I do find it interesting that this image of Mary Magdalene has persevered when it means that Jesus' ministry, since she served him out of her resources, was funded, if you believe this, by sex work. But the reality is there's just nothing in the Bible that supports this story about who she was and where her money came from. And that makes me wonder if some men were or are threatened by her and found ways to lessen her power, minimize her, silence her voice in history because they were uncomfortable with her, not because of her occupation, but because she didn't fit the role that they wanted women to be in, which is subservient. And what better way to make her that than to equate her with that work? Whether or not that is intentional, doing this kind of work rhetorically certainly is a tool of empires to work to demonize that which they need to silence. I'm reminded this week of an article that I read in a rhetoric class, 30 years ago, back in 1991, about the rhetoric of war. I actually pulled the textbook out, remembered my professor calling it Goshgarian. It's a weird habit of professors who are always calling our books by the authors' names. I suppose it's because they write books. How leaders find words to diminish and dehumanize and then demonize people in order to defend the indefensible. The only way to get good people to hurt people or to not care if you are hurting people is to turn them into something that is evil or small enough that it's okay to destroy. Here's an example. Oz. At least according to Gregory Maguire and the Wicked for Good movie that seeks to answer the question, how did the Wicked Witch become wicked? In Wicked, Elphaba is a very smart and very ethical college student at some point in the story who wants to meet with the wizard and hopefully make some changes alongside him. But when she meets the people in Oz, she discovers they don't see eye to eye on what is right for the people, and they are afraid of her because she's so strong and she has magic. And so they start a smear campaign. They turn her into the Wicked Witch of the West that you should all be afraid of, who must be hunted and killed. And then all of Oz gets to celebrate. Good news, she's dead. That was a threat to our values. Here's another example. Tomorrow we celebrate MLK Day. And this also happened to Martin Luther King Jr. In his time, King was widely hated, attacked as a troublemaker, a liar, a con man, and a communist. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover called King the most notorious liar in the country. And the St. Louis Globe Democrat called King one of the most menacing men in America today. There were roadside billboards all over the South throughout that purported to show King at a communist training camp. Somehow, though, now we've anesthetized or whitewashed King's message enough that he's acceptable to almost everyone. So he gets his day. Just don't forget that he said, the biggest threat today is the white moderate. So pay attention to yourselves there. We'll see how long his day lasts. You know where this is going, right? Because we see this happening in our own city as well, finding a way to defend the indefensible, as George Orwell said. What happens when an agent of the state kills a white woman, a mom, a wife, a poet, who was getting in their way, kind of? They have a problem. So this mom, wife, mother, PTA member becomes in various places, from the words of Kristi Noem to the President of the United States. Kristi Noem said, Good attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle. And the President said, she was very disorderly, obstructing and resisting. She behaved horribly, and then she ran them over. She didn't try to run them over, she ran them over. And since then, Renee Good has been called by various sources like the New York Post an anti-ICE warrior who was part of a group of activists who work to document and resist the federal immigration crackdown in Minnesota. It is said that Good linked up with anti-activists through her 6-year-old son's woke charter school. Good and her wife, and of course they've made something of that as well, Rebecca, were raising the boy together in a mostly working-class, activist-heavy neighborhood of South Minneapolis, which features tree-lined streets and a large number of homes with windows decked out in LGBTQ+ flags or signs depicting George Floyd. I think they thought this was an insult. The radio host Eric Erickson mocked Miss Good as awful. This is the new term, affluent white female urban liberals. Others suggested that women like Miss Good were emasculating American men, even undermining Western civilization, what's left of it anyway. Another source uses rhetoric that might demonize some of you, organized gangs of wine moms who are using Antifa tactics to harass and impede immigration and custom enforcement agents. Criminal conspiracies planned by self-important white women protesting with a weird, disturbing glee. And Will Cain of Fox News Channel echoed Marcus, saying, "There's a weird kind of smugness in the way that these liberal white women interact with authority." And as you know, 6 federal prosecutors resigned because they were told they would not be investigating the shooting, but were going to be investigating Renee Good's wife, Rebecca. I would say that you can't make this stuff up, but clearly someone made this stuff up to defend the indefensible. Organized gangs of wine moms. Awesome. It's a very effective smear campaign. Maybe not effective to us, but we know many people around the country who are buying this revised story of who Renee was. And that makes it easier to accept her killing. Who hasn't seen some stupid thing like, "You play, you pay," on their Facebook feed? That was from my cousin. It happened to Jesus too, who technically was killed for sedition. There's this conversation between him and Pilate, when Pilate is trying to figure out why this problem has landed at his doorstep, why he's been turned over to the state to be killed. Pilate asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "Do you ask this of your own, or did others tell you about me?" And then he says, Jesus goes on to say, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over, but my kingdom is not from here." "So you are a king," Pilate says. "You say that I am a king. But for this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth." To which Pilate replies, "What is truth?" Indeed, that is the question of the hour. What is truth? Later, when they hang him on the cross, they put a sign up on him that says, "King of the Jews," in a bunch of different languages. And then the chief priests want it changed. They wanted to say, "This man says he was the king of the Jews," which would make him guilty. But Pilate won't do it, because he never heard him say that. I often have rested on a quote, I think from Socrates, that says, "If people speak ill of you, live to prove them wrong," which is a good way to live, regardless of whether it will work or not, because it won't always work. Sometimes the ill speak wins and defines who you are and how you're remembered. It's still the right way to live to prove them wrong. And at times like this, for Mary Magdalene, for Elphaba, for Renee Good, for MLK, and for people everywhere who have been mischaracterized, demonized, dehumanized, or even just reduced to one moment in time instead of their whole lives, you are a beloved child of God. First and foremost, first and always. Beloved child of God, Renee Good, beloved child of God. May she rest in peace. Organized wine moms, beloved children of God. And actually, ICE agents, beloved children of God. Because see, if we can get everyone to acknowledge that identity in ourselves and in each other, then the rhetoric doesn't work, and we become our best selves, and we quit hurting each other. Mary Magdalene, beloved child of God, who had an important role to play in the ministry of Jesus. While much of her role has been erased and reduced, we'll call up what we can and give her space in our own understanding of the biblical stories and see what she has to teach us. Amen.